What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with a little last second live stream, this time for the LIV Golf event in Boston. Going to cover the golf course, give you the Spark Notes version of the course breakdown I put out earlier today, touch on the weather, but more importantly, the types of players that I'll be targeting both from an outright perspective and then, of course, for Draftkings as we go through the salary board. So just want to welcome anyone in there. Of course, a lot of you will probably watch this on replay, which is just as fine as well. If you have any questions throughout watching this live, do not be shy at all to go ahead and comment them down below. And if you're watching this on replay too, feel free to go ahead and comment any questions that you have. Because we have until tomorrow afternoon, obviously shotgun start. Not going to have the guys teeing off until I believe right on 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Going to have plenty of time to consume this content and, of course, ask away with questions. Let's go ahead and hop on into it. We're not going to delay at all here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And most importantly, we're going to start with a look at the weather here in the Bolton, Massachusetts area. So the golf course, the International, it is the Oaks Golf Course. So there's a few on property at the International, which is a really high upscale country club / resort style setup. And the conditions couldn't be more beautiful. It's in the northeastern suburbs of Massachusetts, I should say of Boston. And tomorrow looks beautiful. Right around 1 to 2 miles an hour of wind when they'll be teeing off. And when they're finishing up, it gets up to a whopping 5 to 7 miles an hour. So you're looking at pretty much pristine conditions for these players, which is quite different than what you saw today. Like if they had started on Thursday, you had 15 to 20 miles an hour of wind. So I'm sure with some of their practice rounds, it's going to play a lot easier for tomorrow's event. And frankly, it's not like this course needs to be any easier. You're dealing with a par 70. So despite it being listed as a par 72 on here, understand that there will be a couple par 5s changed into par 4s. I have confirmed that hole number 1 is one of them that they'll be changing to a par 4. And hole number, I believe it's 14 here, the 547-yard par 5 on the back is also going to be changed to a par 4. So though it is on paper supposed to be a difficult golf course, right? You know, a par 72 playing as a par 70. Let's take a look at some of the holes. So, and we're actually going to bring up the 3D planner here. Hopefully it doesn't lag too bad on the stream. Sometimes it does on my end. We'll have to see. I can see there's already a super chat down there. Sack, you're just tossing money at me. Absolutely love it, man. He said the PGA planning the Japanese golfer Ayuze deck. Try to get me to say funny things. I love it there. And Nick says live, love, laugh. That's the comment of the century there. Let's go ahead and talk about this golf course. It's going to be super gettable. So this is the hole I think is going to be a par 4. You can see it's 535 yards for a par 5. So it is the shortest on property. That's why I think it's going to be a par 4. We're not going to look at each shot, but 175-yard par 3, that's easy. 343-yard par 4. So that's drivable for most of the field. I mean, that's going to be an absolute cupcake. 171 for a par 3, and that's severely downhill, almost 20 yards downhill. I think that's going to be super gettable. 340-yard par 4. I mean, just, for a tour professional, this golf course isn't going to look as difficult as it would be for you and me. Like if we went out there and played, there's still undulation out there. They're still going to be running at 11.5, 12 on the stint meter. I mean, me and you would be out there missing in the trees, right? In their dense trees I kind of talked about during the course breakdown. But I think you get the idea at this point, right? You're going to have drivable holes. Let's look at a hard hole here. This would be classified as a difficult hole around this track. It's 393 yards. I mean, for goodness sakes, right? Like these guys like a Bryson, specifically, I guess a Cam Smith and Dustin Johnson that are relatively long off the tee and also keep it in play are going to be looking at wedges on almost every single hole. So we're not going to go through every single hole here, but I wanted to give you an idea of what to expect, right? It's a golf course where you're going to have a lot of wedges in hand. You're going to have par 5s where you might be hitting those long irons. But I mean, outside of that, it's a lot of pitching wedges, a lot of 9 irons, maybe 8 irons into greens. And that's when players go out there and score. So at the beginning of the week, because it's a short northeastern track, it has the bent grass. I mean, we saw it with Brookline. They can play relatively difficult. I wanted to give it some respect, but the more and more I broke it down by looking at it hole by hole, I also watched quite a bit of content. I forget the guy's name. It's Jay something out there. He's been doing a lot of content from the International over the last week in sponsorship with the LIV Golf Tour. and it looks extremely receptive. I mean, the greens, I mean, even for somebody that's low spin, like the guy that was playing is not a tour professional by any means, was getting 5-6 yards of rip back, which you're not going to see that on just any golf course. You got to have really pristine greens. They got to be running relatively fast, but most importantly, they have to be receptive. And he was also getting no rollout on fairways. Now he has a relatively high ball flight, so that has to do with it. But they were hitting and bouncing maybe 6 or 7 inches and stopping right there. So, you know, though it's only 6,900 yards, I mean, I think it's going to play a little bit longer because of how receptive it is. But when you're hitting into greens, right, it's going to more than make up for that. I mean, you're going to have absolute dartboards out there, a golf course that's less than 7,000 yards, 2 drivable par 4s, 3 par 5s. And by the way, I meant to mention that, right? Like there's normally 5 par 5s here, which is definitely atypical for your usual par 72. There's going to still be 3 of them, right? So even for a par 70, you still have an extra par 5 there. And the longest par 3 is only 209 yards. So, I mean, they're going to be hitting 6 irons into that green. That's really not an issue for your average tour player. And then on a lot of the other ones, like this one that's 175, plays like 150 yards because it's downhill. Same thing with hole number 4. You actually have one that's 150 yards. I mean, I think that the winning score here, and this might be a hot take, is literally going to be like 20 under par. Like these guys are going to annihilate this golf course. So I had took some overs on guys on Prize Picks early in the week. And some of the lines I dropped in, like I feel horrible about those right now. Like I've added a few cards today, and they're all unders on guys that I think are playing really good golf. Because I mean, this just looks like a birdie fest to me, especially when we take a look at it. I know they're going to try and add distance where they can, but when we went hole by hole, especially if you take a look at the course breakdown, we're not going to do the whole thing right now. Again, there was hardly any room to add distance. Almost every single tee box was already lined up to the back of the tree line. So it wasn't like there was a lot of room to even add distance there. I mean, it's just, they've played at difficult golf courses to this point. I think you're going to see the opposite. I think you're going to see this place get absolutely nuked. And in terms of skill set, I guess we'll talk about it after we catch up on chat. We'll talk about the types of players I'm trying to get to. And then afterwards, we're going to hop into the actual player pool. So let's see what we've got. Mark, he says, I've played this track from all the way back, 8,300 yards. No idea. It looks like it's 6,900 yards to me. I don't know if it's 8,300 yards, boss. You said it's the longest course in the world from all the way back. Maybe you're talking about another golf course, man, because there's no room out there to add distance. Like from all the overhead looks, you might have played a different course at the International. Like they have multiple tracks there. It's not the one they're playing, the Oaks course. So this Oaks course is like tipped out at 6,900 yards. Like I said on the track, I think it might get to 7,200 yards if they tried to take like adjacent angles. So not just like directly in line with their tee box, but perhaps move back left or back right, that sort of thing, create a different angle into the fairway. I might be able to add like 20, 30 yards on average per hole, but they're not going to be able to make it like 8,300 yards. So I don't know about that, man. I think you might have played a different golf course, to be honest. Zach says, are you going to make a spreadsheet on Patreon? I am not. That's not something that I do for the LIV Tour. Never have, never will. They do not have shots gain stats. Adolphus says, what ownership percentage would you put in an optimizer for the tournament? Well, I personally don't have ownership projections for this. So, and I don't know who does. If they do, it's probably their best guess at best. It's really shoddy at this point. I mean, the first time he played LIV Golf Showdown, if you guys remember, I forget the guy's name. He was South African. He ended up playing really well that event. He was 36% owned before anybody even knew who he was. It was Henny Duplessis. He was 36% owned the first ever LIV Golf event. Nobody could have guessed that. I mean, nobody even knew who Henny Duplessis was except for the South Africans. And I really think that's why he was as highly owned as he was. All the South Africans were a lot higher owned than people expected. There's shit like that going on with LIV ownership. So I personally have no gauge on it. I mean, I'm going to know who's like the chalk, right? I'm going to be able to know who the chalk is, but I'm not going to be able to know who like the Henny Duplessis, who's 36% owned, is. I mean, like there's literally no way to tell who that is. You've seen it every event too. There's like random guys that are mega chalk. I wouldn't trust anything out there, to be quite honest with you. Like I don't know who you would use for that. And if I'm going to set lineups or rules in an optimizer based on those projections, I want to make sure that they're correct, that they're things that I can actually rely on, right? And just the ownership's all over the place at this point, man. I mean, I'll just say that right now. Like I can't get a gauge on it. I kind of find it hard to believe that others would be able to too, because I'm one of the forefronters. I think one of the best ownership people out there. Jeff says, what's up, man? How is Data Golf driving distance and accuracy stats for the LIV tournaments? They're real. They put out the stats, but they're your average rudimentary stats. You don't get like shots gained stats, for example. So you'll get driving accuracy stats. You're going to get average driving distance. Their average driving distance is only for 4 holes. So you know the PGA Tour, it's 2 holes. It's at least 4 for the LIV Golf events. And driving accuracy is for total fairways hit. So that one's a little bit more accurate, but it's a guess because they're not actually getting the GPS data. There's not incorporating whether a missed fairway is in a hazard versus something like just in the rough. So on the PGA Tour, when you get a whole, -1 penalty for hitting it in a water hazard, for example, that's not incorporated to this data golf type of stats. So just know what the stats are that you're looking at. It's a good thing that you asked, Jeff. It's a really, really great question because a lot of people will use stats and not understand what's going into them because they only have the driving accuracy percentages and then the driving distance averages on their disposal. That's all they're going to have to work with. And they're really bright. They go out there and they do a really good job at estimating it, but it still is an estimate. Gsluke, what are you saying? Is for golf strategy, game strategy. It's actually for Grand Slam Luke. So it's a little bit out there. It's a nickname I was given as a child because I happened to hit a lot of Grand Slams and did it back-to-back in a Little League tournament. Went out there, hit a Grand Slam, next at bat, had bases loaded, proceeded to do the same thing. So the nickname kind of stuck after that. Mark says, what do you think about Wiesberger each way this week? So I don't know how many slots you'd be getting in a 48-player tournament. I'm assuming like 4 or 5, right? If you're getting any more than that, even better. I like him at a short golf course, more of a positional type of golf course, which we're going to talk about the skill set here in a second. I 100% think that this is his sort of golf course. On the European Tour, that's where you've seen him get into that top 5. And if you have an each way bet, I like it even more because I think the outright might be a little bit pushing it, right? I think you know that, right? The actual win out there might be a little far-fetched, but I think the top 5 is definitely out there. Zach says, should that Laurie Cantor and Richard Bland be good, cheaper plays? I like Richard Bland a lot. Kind of like a Wiesberger. You take him at shorter golf courses. He's more positional. He's going to hit a lot of fairways. And I think this could be a birdie fest. So, how I said like the winning scores going to be 20 under? We're going to talk about it here in a second. I think it's going to be all about putting. So guys like Richard Bland, Laurie Cantor for that matter, check that sort of box. I don't know if Cantor's playing this week. I thought he was on the DP World Tour. I might be wrong. Who knows? Robert says, my name's Gsluke and I hit dingers. It used to be the thing. And then I went to golf, football, lacrosse, those sort of things. But yeah, when I was a young age, I played a lot of baseball, but it got really boring to be really fast. All right. So do I still have this up? Yeah. Okay. We're on the wrong page. Let's talk about the player pool. Actually, before we get into the player pool, let's talk about the types of players I'm looking for. Probably even more important, right? So you guys can make your own lineups here. So the main thing here for me is it's a short golf course, right? So a lot of people would instantly write off bombers, but you don't want to do that, right? Because on those drivable par 4s, they're still 340 yards. They're really only drivable, at least to get it to eagle range, by bombers like a Bryson, like guys like a Brooks Koepka, right? Dustin Johnson, Cam Smith, you could probably classify as a bomber. I mean, he hits it out there like 320 yards. Those sort of guys can actually get up on the green surface. That's going to matter, right? In the par 5s, they're going to be able to reach all 3 of them easily. You just get it in the fairway. It's going to be like a 4 or 5 iron at the most to get it on that surface. It's going to make a difference there. But I think more than anything, it opens up the field for anybody to win, right? Because you don't have to have that distance. You can still reach all the par 5s and 2. Now, those guys might be hitting 3-wood into them, so might not have a ton of eagles. But if you birdie all the par 5s the whole week, I mean, you can feel pretty good about that, especially when you have those drivable par 4s, which maybe for a non-bomber, they're not going for the green. But if you watch my course breakdown, guys, I mean, you're going to have like a 40-yard wedge shot from the fairway. That's like almost a gimme birdie like 60, 70% of the time. I legitimately think the birdie or better percentage on those par 4s might be 60% plus. And on the par 5s might be 65% plus. So I think between the 3 par 5s and the 2 drivable par 4s, might be looking at an average of like 3.5 birdies just on those 5 holes alone, let alone the par 3s, which, most of them are like 170 yards, that sort of thing. I think it's going to be a lot more about just converting these birdies, making putts. And I hate to say it, but John Rahm, good thing you're not playing here on the LIV Tour yet. This looks like an effing birdie fest to me. It looks like a putting fest, putting contest, like John Rahm would say, where it's going to be all about the guys who can make those 10 to 15 footers, because all day you're going to have those looks. I mean, let's look at it. Difficult golf hole, right? It's going to be hole number 1, right? It's probably going to be like 480 yards. Woohoo, right? Got to hit like a 7 iron into the green hole. That's a real tough one, right? I got to hit a 7 iron into a 175-yard hole. Ooh, woohoo, right? Like these guys are going to hit that to 20 feet. That's not an issue for them. Some of them are going to stick darts to 4 or 5 feet just based on how receptive these greens are. Like I was mentioning, guys that are nowhere near scratch golfers, we're getting like 5 or 6 yards of rollback with their wedges. I mean, these guys are going to absolutely annihilate this golf course. Just take the guys that can putt the best. I mean, just especially down low, a lot of people are mentioning some of those flyer picks that we're going to talk about here in a second. Yeah, I'm all about them. They don't need to be these bombers to have success. Now, Bryson, DJ, we're going to talk about them here in a second. I love this week because they're also good putters, right? They're bombers, but they can also match it up with one of the hottest putters in the world, right? Bryson, when he's on with his putting, no one is better than him on the greens. Like, he just becomes an absolute robot when he's making putts out there. You definitely need him to get to that, to have that ceiling performance. Same thing with Dustin Johnson, right? When he gets on a roll with that flat stick, he's like an absolute robot. He makes everything out there. So for me, it's a lot about accuracy off the tee. I mean, if anything, elite distance or elite accuracy. I want one of the two factors. In terms of your approach play, it's all about wedges. So your 50 to 125, your 125 to 150 yard range are definitely things that I'm incorporating a little bit more. And then in terms of your around the green play, all that other stuff, it's pretty average, right? A few things that I'm maybe considering a little bit less this week. I guess number one for me would definitely, I suppose, driving distance, right? Like in terms of like my actual model at the end of the day, it's not really something I'm incorporating all that much because I'm going to take the studs up top, right? Like I don't need a model to tell me to go out there and play Dustin Johnson, to tell me to play somebody like a Bryson DeChambeau, for example, right? And on the flip side, when I'm trying to take somebody down here in the $6,000 or $7,000 range, it's not all bombers, right? They tend to be guys that I don't know why it is, right? All the bombers tend to be the best players in the world. Clearly, right? There's a correlation to success there, and a lot of people try to avoid that conversation. There's obviously a correlation to success there. But those guys, right? Like, what are we trying to figure out about them? Oh, they need to be good putters, right? Like, more than anything down low, you're looking for the most exceptional putters when you're at a birdie fest or a putting contest like you'll have this week. So, with that being said, let's talk about some of these players. So, we're going to talk about like the 10K range here. Then we'll hop back into chat. So, if you have any questions or anybody that you're considering playing that maybe you're on the fence on, go ahead and throw them down in chat now. Let's try and keep it to the 10K range or maybe the 9K range too. But up top, I love Dustin Johnson. So we talked about the hot putter there. Cameron Smith, too. I've heard a lot of good things about how he's played so far from media, like people that are there on site. So those two guys up top, I don't think you can go wrong with either player. And frankly, I think the ownership is going to hover around Cam Smith. I think he's going to be by far your highest owned player. So if you're taking the game theory route, only playing a few lineups, maybe you just fade Cam Smith and go elsewhere, right? You hope he doesn't have that ceiling round. But on Prize Picks, I am backing Cam Smith heftily. Just not sure what I'm going to do on GPPs yet. Again, one thing I'll say too is if you're looking for my actual player pool, after I finish this up here for my Patreon members on the Discord, I am going to be doing a live show where I actually go on to Fantasy Cruncher, which is a widely available optimizer, not one that I use for all of my personal lineups. But what I'm going to do on there is show you guys how I would build a set of, not 150 lineups. I think we're going to do like 75 or 80 lineups, something like that, in that optimizer for tomorrow. So if you were going out there trying to build your own set of lineups, that sort of thing, I'm going to show you how I would do it on like a mainstream optimizer, right? Not one where I'm using my modeling, importing projections, that sort of thing on my end, because you don't have access to that, right? So like the sort of optimizers you'd have access to, how I would build lineups. I'm going to do that on the Discord afterwards. So that's something that you want to see, right? All of the players that I'm actually playing, and literally my lineups are going to be on the screen. Just don't dupe me if you're in there. It's just, it's pointless. We're going to end up sharing first place. There's no reason to do that. It'll all be there though. So that's what we'll be doing. So it'll be the first time I've ever done that, by the way. And I guess I'm more willing to do it because, I'm using an outside optimizer, but still it's going to give you a lot of insight if you're there on the Patreon Discord. I definitely recommend it. So we'll have to see what we do with Cam Smith. It may end up being a fade just due to ownership reasons. But DJ, I think, will be a little bit lower owned, I guess, because he's more expensive than Cam Smith. Obviously, Cam Smith, number 2 player in the world at this point. DJ hasn't really looked like DJ for quite some time. So I do think that he will be the lower owned option. But if you're looking for a cash play, right, like it's got to be Cam Smith, right? If you took DJ in cash, I think that's a little bit too risky there. But in a large field GPP, when we're trying to win first place against a couple thousand other people, or even in my case, right, I'm playing at single entries versus a couple hundred other people. In my 140 person contest, I mean, Cam Smith might be owned 60, 70 of those lineups, right? Like 40, 50% of them, like legitimately. I might have to avoid that and just play that game theory game, right? Shrink my contest down to 50, 60 other people if he were to go out there and have a flat tire. So We'll have to see. And again, he's been injured, right? So it's not like that's outside of his range of outcomes. I love Cam Smith. I've got the mullet going myself. I mean, clearly one of my favorite players on tour. He's still more than capable of going out there and having a flat tire. So we'll have to see. I might bet him outright, just take him that direction, right? And if he sucks in DFS, we're going to end up cashing out tomorrow. We'll have to see, though. I do like Bryson here. He's got the power to get onto those drivable par fours. He's got more than enough distance to get to those par fives, too. So I really like what we're seeing there. $10,000. He's coming in with really bad form. I mean, if you look at any of his results, if you look at any of the reports from the media, everything will point to you to Bryson not being in form. But I hear that he's healthy. He's getting to new speed records with some of his speed training. And that to me shows that he's, confident to go out there and swing fully. Bryson DeChambeau is a generational type player. And, people will give him so much shit for like his personality, and that's fine, right? But when you look at him in terms of pure talent level, pure pedigree, pure potential in terms of an athlete, I mean, it's unbelievable, right? He took himself from being like an average player, changed his body type, and became somebody who was borderline dominant. And sure, that ended up catching up to him, right? But he claims that he's fine now. He's able to swing with full might. And I know it's going to take time to shake off that rust, but this guy plays golf like 6 hours every single day. At some point, it's going to break through for Bryson, and like he's just going to win like every live event for like 2-3 months. Like he's just going to be dominant out here. And he's the sort of guy who like actually cares about playing on live. Now there's guys out here, the motivation thing can certainly be a question mark. You might even like Phil Mickelson just say that he's just showing up out here, not trying whatsoever, because it doesn't really matter. He got such a big paycheck just to show up to live. Bryson's not going to live on his laurels. I can almost guarantee you that he tries the hardest of anybody out there. So I like that at 10 grand. Anytime somebody motivated to go out there, I think is being slept on. I think he's just a better player than people give him credit for. I mean, the way that he dominated at Winged Foot, he's like the only player on the planet that can do that. Like the only one. Not one other player could have won that tournament in such dominant fashion. Not one human being. So I think that speaks for itself. And I think almost anyone who watched that US Open would attest to that it was probably the most impressive major performance I've seen for God knows how long, right? At least 10 years probably in terms of dominance out there. He's still got that in his back pocket. And you see it with the birdie production, right? It's sucked so far this year, but over the last few events, at least he's starting to make more birdies. And maybe I'm just beating my head against a wall playing the guy over and over again. But again, once it like snaps through, I'm going to be early on it because like he goes out there, shoots 4 or 5 under tomorrow. He's going to be like 60% owned. Like everyone's going to play Bryson. It's like going to be a no-brainer because when he's on, he makes 6 birdies a round, like clockwork. It just happens. He's the best fantasy scorer that we have in fantasy golf when he's on his game. Like, I mean, you just look at the numbers, especially from 2020, 2021. He made so many more birdies than the rest of the field that his like Draftkings gained numbers were like number 1 by 4 or 5 points. That's the type of scorer that he is when he's on his game. So I'll be there. Again, I know it might bite me in the ass, but I'm willing to take it when he's going to be lower owned than Joaquin Niemann, at least per my, early hunch, right? I think that Joaquin Niemann, based on how he's playing, fresh new name into the live, I think he's going to get quite a bit of attention. Taylor Gooch, I think will be super low owned. In fact, one of the lower owned players on the slate. Moving down to this 9K range, I mean, Paul Casey, $9,900. I think that he'll probably be a little bit lower owned than he should be, but I don't know. I think he's overrated, right? Like $9,900, you could spend $100 more and get Bryson, $200 more and get Joaquin Niemann. I'd rather do that all day or even spend down, get to a Brooks Koepka or a Louis Oosthuizen. Now, we're getting down to the range of bombers, right? So like up top, I like DJ, I like Cam Smith because they're long off the tee. Same thing with Bryson. We're starting to get to the range after Brooks, let's say, where you can't really rely on that, right? You got Matthew Wolff, who's the 8K range. Maybe he's the outlier there. But outside of that, it's a lot of guys that are relatively, I would say, mediocre or below average in terms of their driving distance, right? Like, especially here in this 7K range, you're talking about guys that are just absolute lame ducks off the tee. Thing is, that's okay, right? Like on normal slates, like I would just be like, oh, I don't know who we're going to pick here, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of guys down low that I'm willing to take. So for me and my personal strategy and what you'll see when, if you come into the Patreon chat there and see what I actually do when I build my lineups, I'm going to be a lot more selective up top. There's going to be a lot more guys I fade up top percentage-wise than guys I'm fading down low. In fact, in terms of taking shots down low, I mean, it's going to be hard for me not to want to play people because they're so cheap. They all can get to that same sort of putting upside and they're super low owned, right? Like they're coming in 4 or 5% owned, Whereas all these guys at the top of the board, I mean, even Bryson's probably going to be like 15, maybe 20, 25% owned. You're going to be looking at like 30, 40% on guys like a DJ and Cam Smith. It's kind of like a round 4 showdown, right? Where like the guys up top are going to be like 30, 40%. Your average ownership is going to be like 20% for these guys in the 9K range. You got to be aggressive up top, right? You got to pick your spots up there. This middle tier range, 7K range, there's a lot of guys I'll consider. Now, it's not going to be everybody, right? We're going to have to still pick spots when we get down here, but it's a little bit more wide open than it would be for most slates, at least because of again, only a 48 player field. In fact, even a smaller slate than what you get for like a Sunday showdown. So we talked about the 10K range. We'll catch up on chat, see what's going on. We got Jeffy says bombers or accurate players. It's kind of like one or the two extremes for me. One of the two. Mark says some of the greens are enormous. Yeah, some of them look really big, at least on the satellite imagery. And some of them look really small, Mark. So maybe you can confirm that for me. One of them looked like a little teardrop out there. I believe it was the par 3 second, or maybe it's the par 3 fourth. It was one of the two holes. And then a few of them look like aircraft carriers. So definitely agree. What do you mean they got a grand slam? That's when you have 3 batters on base in baseball and then you hit a home run, so you score 4 runs. I did that twice, which again, it was Little League. It's not that impressive, but someone asked about the nickname. I figured I'd give you the backstory. Zach says, I really want to play Brendan Grace in that 9 to 8K range. So let's see where he's at. He's played really well since he's gotten over to the LIV Tour. So you're definitely betting that he continues to run on that sort of form. But the one thing that I will warn against that is they're not playing that often, right? Like, recent form for the PGA Tour means a lot more than it means for these LIV Tour guys because they have so much time in between their events. We have no idea the sort of focus or practice regimen that these players are on in between events. Whereas on the PGA Tour, we know that a week off probably means a week off. But when they're out there on tour grinding it out for 2 to 3 weeks, I mean, there's not really that much in question about the state of their game or the amount that they've been practicing, etc. Their health, all of those sort of factors. So with Brendan Grace, his form, especially given his long-term pedigree, which, his form looks great, but his long-term pedigree is that of a much lower tier player than the other guys that are around him in this 8K range. Like, he's clearly the odd man out in terms of talent level. I mean, him and Carlos Ortiz, right? Are the guys that are clearly more expensive than they should be. You're going to ask yourself that question, like, is that going to come to an end here? I personally would bet on that happening because I think he's going to be a little bit higher owned, right? I think he'll be higher owned than Wolf. I think he'll be higher owned than Varner. I think Horsfield will probably be a little bit lower owned, but even Carlos Ortiz, because of how he played in the last 2 LIV events, probably going to be higher owned than his counterparts, like a Kokrak, who I love this week. We'll talk about Kokrak. Charles Howell III, for example, who I all think are just better players than those 2 guys. And so they're going to get the ownership bump, right? And you have to determine, Sack, whether you think that's worth taking. And at least to me, I don't think it is. I think that all these players, if they're playing well above their means for a certain amount of time, that's great. You might want to catch them while they're on the heater, but they come to an end because of the law of averages, right? They got to return to their baseline at some point. So that's usually my take on that. Jack says, the more LIV sign-up players, the more players will fall out of the top 48. So you could see a LIV Division 2. That would be interesting, honestly. I know a lot of them right now, Jack, what essentially is happening to them is they're being relegated down to the Asian Tour, but they're at a higher status. So they still have, I believe, unlimited starts. They're also still getting paid by the LIV Tour while they're down there on the Asian Tour. It's not nearly as much. They're also not playing for the purses on the LIV Tour. That's really the main reason that they all want to play on it, even at just small salary levels. But they're going to have some sort of tournament or some sort of, at least to my understanding, like standing system down there on the Asian Tour where they can qualify for certain LIV events. So like the top qualifier after this certain date gets a sponsors exemption or something like that sort of thing into the next LIV event. So that's how they're doing it, at least to my understanding. But if they make a whole nother league, that would make sense too, because they have enough players, particularly if they start to take some of the college players out, which I've heard talks of that. I've also heard talks of them taking LPGA players, putting them over here on the LIV Tour. If they do that, yeah, there'd be way more than enough players to do that. Like they could do 254 player tours. And I know they ideally want 54 players in the field, not 48. So we'll have to see if all that happens. There's a lot of rumblings about the LPGA happening where like the whole tour might get acquired by the LIV Tour. I've heard that that's a possibility, which I think for their sake, I think they want it to happen. At least from my understanding, like their owner didn't want to do it like by under any means, Like all the players want it to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Because they want it to happen because they're going to get paid more. I mean, they're not blind to that. Let's talk about this AK range. So we talked about Grace as potentially being a little bit over-owned. Somebody that I've bet outright, and I absolutely love this week, is Abraham Ancer. So short golf course, you give me a course where putting matters, particularly on bent grass. All of those things scream Abraham Ancer to me, so much so that I bet him outright. He was my first click there and probably my highest owned player when it comes to Showdown tomorrow. So we'll have to see. I have exposure on Prize Picks. Essentially, I'm in the Abraham Ancer fan club here for Friday's round. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Like he tears up these short courses. You saw him play well at the Travelers a few years ago. Played well when the FedEx St. Jude, another short par 70. You saw that for the first round of the FedEx Cup playoffs this year. And, unfortunate that he couldn't be there to defend his crown. That's a whole other thing. But $8,800, I'll definitely be there. Let's see what else we've got. Sergio Garcia likes himself a golf course that depends on ball striking, which that doesn't necessarily, check that box here, right? It's a little bit more about putting than anything, but I think you could do worse things. I think Patrick Reed I like a little bit more than Sergio, so let me take a look at him. Didn't mention Louis earlier, but I like his putting, so I could see myself getting into Louis. Excuse me, guys. See, Jason Kokrak, I promised we talk about him. So he kind of fits that DJ mold where if I really like DJ at a golf course and I really like DJ here, I might end up betting him outright. I'm also really going to like Jason Kokrak because they have elite skill sets that coincide, right? Long off the tee bomber. They both do that extremely well. They're both relatively accurate. They're not accurate drivers, right? But for guys that hit it a long way, they hit a pretty decent amount of fairways. But on top of that, they're elite level putters. Now, Kokrak, we couldn't always say that about, right? Early in his career, his first 15 years, the guy couldn't hit the broadside of a barn for his life. But now over the last year and a half, I think that's actually 2.5 years at this point, right? He's an established elite level putter now. And when you have that elite distance and elite putting, he's going to be able to take advantage of those short par fours, right? The drivable ones, those, relatively short par fives that you have out there. I like that a whole lot. And he's $8,100 and he's a winner. You've seen him win over the last few years. That matters too. What else we have? We have a CH3. I don't hate. I really like Tringale. When these new guys come over, it seems like one of them ends up winning. So maybe it's Cameron Tringale winning his first ever professional event over here on the LIV Tour. That'd be, kind of be a meme. I like Kevin Na too. I might bet him outright. Not long off the tee, but we're starting to get into the range. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. You're not going to get all of these bombers, and it's especially true here in the 7K range. But one thing that Kevin Na does well is everything else we're looking for. The wedges that we're looking for. He's one of the best wedge players in the world. In fact, on the PGA Tour before he left, he was #1 in shots gained approach on the entire tour before he left and came to LIV for the season, which nobody will talk about how good Kevin Na was hitting it and that he couldn't make a putt. But now he's starting to make putts in the LIV Tour. You saw it last time out, had a few good rounds. If the approach play just continues to be there, which it looks like it has been at the LIV Tour, honestly, it's just the putting is starting to finally come around. Kevin Na might be in a stretch where he can win some golf because that iron play is nowhere near as sharp as it has been for the last few months. I don't know where he's gotten this from. Frankly, even this whole year, it's just been on fire for Kevin Na. The putting has just got to get back to that Kevin Na putting that we're used to, where he's walking shit in left and right. If he's starting to do that again, he's going to win a golf tournament. And you see him do it once a year. It's the Kevin Na special. You get that one win a year that you don't see coming. Now that he's on the LIV Tour, right, he doesn't have nearly as many starts. So maybe it's once biannually, every 2 years, that we end up getting that dub. But I'll definitely be there. He's got the upside we're looking for. Lahiri's a new guy, so you might want to consider him under that same narrative. But I'm a little bit more excited to play Kevin Na than I would be in Arnaban Lahiri. Let's see. Not a ton of guys I like here. But again, it's Showdown, right? Anything can happen. So I'm going to be scattershotting a lot of guys in this range. So we're not going to talk about every player that I like, but it's putting specialists. We talked about Wiesberger. I like him for that reason. Down here in the top of the 6K range, we have guys like Saddam Kawanjana. That's as good as I'm going to get when it comes to the pronunciation. I know it's completely butchered, but Saddam is an absolute stud. We've seen that to this point. I would not be surprised if he earns a permanent spot on the LIV Tour just based on how he's played so well. Again, he was in contention at the Open Championship. He was that guy. If you guys remember that there on Sunday, he was making that charge. Let's see. Richard Bland, I like a whole lot, $6,400. He's definitely got the putting upside we're looking for. Wade Ormsey, pretty good putter. could see myself getting there. Eugenio Chacarra, I like him quite a bit at $6,000. I hear that he's an absolute striper of the golf ball. Maybe not so much a good putter, but if he's like Sergio Garcia as an absolute striper, and then every once in a while walks into a putt, well, I think that might be a pretty good skill set to go after and target. So I like Chikara down there. Let's see if there's a few other guys we can sprinkle into the pool here for you. Again, and we're going to get a much more complete idea afterwards, which here at 5 minutes when the stream ends, we will go over to the Patreon to discuss. But if there are any questions for people that are watching this live and want to get a deep dive on, go ahead and throw them down in chat now, because afterwards we are going to hop on out of here. So what we'll do in the meantime, while people toss any questions or deep dives that they want, is we're going to talk through a lineup build. So we're going to build a GPP lineup to start, and then afterwards give you the cash build. So it'll give you kind of an idea of how different I might potentially be building here, right? So if you want the Spark Notes version of what I'm going to do over here in the Patreon afterwards, it'll give you a good idea. So in terms of a GPP build, I'm probably avoiding Cam Smith, right? Like I've kind of just come along on that. I love the guy. I'm probably going to have a lot more exposure in every other market than I care to have, particularly on Prize Picks. I'm going to really be backing Cam Smith for round one. I could see myself starting lineups with DJ because I think he's going to be one of the lower owned guys up top. In terms of a second man in, I don't hate to getting somebody like an Answer. Again, I love him a lot here. We're down to $7,500. So while I like the guys here in the 9K range, it might be a little bit too aggressive to start with somebody like a DJ, then maybe take like a Louis. We talked about a little bit earlier. We still have $7,300, but you'll see that, extra $900 that we're spending there might come back to hurt us a little bit. So let's build from there. Let's go DJ and then Answer. For a third man in, I'm actually going to try and save some salary and put Saddam in there. So I mentioned that I think he's a high upside play. Showed us a lot of putting upside at the Open Championship. Again, that golf course, it looks way different than what we have here, but I think it'll play relatively similarly. That puts us at 7,900, right? So, if we're living right around $8,000 to finish our last two spots, which again, I can only do 4 spots because the DraftKings overlords will get a little bit mad about it. I think we can feel pretty solid about this build. So let's go ahead and wrap it up here at $7,800 Kevin Na, and that puts us pretty much right at $8,000 for our last 2 spots. So obviously, a few guys that probably make sense there, right here in this range from Kokrak down to Tringale. Just finish with your favorite 2 of your 3 there, and just this sort of build, right, where instead of starting with a Cam Smith over somebody like a DJ, could make this lineup like 2 to 3 times less likely to be duplicated, right? Because, Cam Smith, DJ, they project for almost the same sort of score tomorrow. When you're talking about maybe duplicating yourself with 5 or 6 people with this sort of build, whereas with the DJ, you might be one of the only people with that build in a huge GPP, let alone, if you're trying to get leverage on the field and go up the leaderboard, right? If you win with Cam Smith here, you're going to isolate yourself with at least 40% of the player pool, right? You're playing like a 5-on-5 versus like 50% of the field. That's okay, right? Whereas, you take DJ over here, he's the absolute nuts. And let's say he's like 10 to 12% owned. Then you're playing against, let's say like 20, 30 other people. Let's say 20% at the very most. Or let's say he's like 20% owned. I'd much rather stomach that than go into a Cam Smith. So that's the idea there in a large field GPP. Now, if we're going for a cash build, I don't mind starting with Cam Smith, right? So I think that's a good bridge right there. I think in terms of like median projection, especially because he's a little bit cheaper than DJ, I'd rather go that direction if I'm looking for a safe cash 50% sort of build. As a second man in, I honestly don't hate getting to Answer once again. I think that he's just such a good course fit, such a good price here. I think that Kokrak is a great play when it comes to cash. I also think that Kevin Na is almost a must play in cash too. That puts you at $7,200. And I don't think you can go wrong here. Like, just take whoever you want in this 7K range. They all pretty much project the same way. And I think the scoring average is going to be something like 2.5 shots under par. And unless your guy goes out there and shoots like even par or +1, I mean, you can feel pretty decent about it, right? It's about trying to lock in some of those ceilings where, a Na, Kokrak, Answer, and Smith, I guess these would be like my core picks of the day. Like if I had to pick out just the 4 guys I think that score the best tomorrow, these would be the 4 that I go with. Just round it off with your favorite guys down low, right? Again, the DraftKings overlords don't like when we give more than 4 players for a single lineup, but I think you get the idea there. So that's all I've got here for this live stream. It's going to be a shorter one, right? Like I mentioned, going live here in like 5-10 minutes on the Discord channel to go ahead over my actual builds. But best of luck with all of your round 1 lineups. Going to do the same thing for rounds 2 through 3. And frankly, for our live stream tomorrow, we're going to have a lot more knowledge to go off of, right? Scoring averages, average birdies. We're going to have seen the golf course on the broadcast, that sort of thing. So make sure to tune in sometime tomorrow night. I'd imagine the round's going to end right around like 6:30, 7 p.m. So expect a live stream probably right around like 7:30 to 8. So I'll post it on my social media. Make sure you're following that if you haven't already so you don't miss the updates there. But like I said, guys, best of luck. Make sure you go ahead and smash that like button before you hop on out of here. And let's go get that cash.